Complaints of police misconduct filed with the Civilian Complaint Review Board are at their highest level since 2012, and stop and frisk activity by NYPD officers is the highest it's been since 2014, with racial disparities still persisting. As mayor, how will you hold NYPD officers accountable for misconduct and address racial disparities in policing? And when, if at all, would you support adopting alternatives to law enforcement intervention? Mr. Blake.
I've endured police brutality twice in my life. Once in high school, where a cop threw me against a car and said thought they heard me yelling, and the second time when I was an assembly member, where the cop said, get off of him, he's the assembly member. And I said, what would have happened to me if you would not have recognized me? So we start from a place that the culture of the NYPD must change. And a very specific thing that must happen is that we need a police misconduct registry to understand any officer who had police misconduct before they got here, why do they have a job here right now? We need to ensure that the Civilian Complaint Review Board actually has truly independent authority to be able to implement their findings and not wonder if the NYPD commissioner would grant it as such. But we also have to totally reimagine what's happening within policing, to your question, Ben, and to NYPD. We need 1,000 mental health professionals actually addressing what's going on in subways and streets, because the cops have not been trained to do that. We need every officer to have a body camera on for greater accountability. And we need to be very intentional right now in what is going on in our communities, where we have to actually have community precision policing, not just officers trying to arrest you because you're black or brown. Now, when we think about what that all means, it reimagines what's happening in our communities in a thoughtful way. Everyone wants to get home alive. And me speaking up should mean that I'm able to have that happen for me just as it is for you.
Just to clarify quickly, were you saying any found violation of police misconduct, the officer should be off the force?
Very specifically, if someone had police misconduct before coming onto the NYPD, we need to understand, why does that person have a job? We have a misconduct registry, whether it be for sexual offense or other dynamics, and so to that point, we need to understand, if you actually had police misconduct before you got here, why do you have a job here?
It's clear to me that it's also leadership. Leadership matters. To have an individual who leads the police department, who fundamentally cares about community. One of the things that I'd like to do is really go back and build community, and so I would like to begin by doing stewardship block by block, building up block leaders, identifying them, training them, but they will not be alone in that process. Bringing our youth, and yes, also bringing our police officers, because what I have found is that the relationship is broken, but also they all have not been really trained on leadership, how to manage a meeting, how to do conflict resolution, and how to actually come together and communicate around issues. I also do not think that somebody who abuses their power should get overtime, and that there has to be some transparency in the community. And so right now, our community is not empowered. They don't have the information and the data that they need. I'd like to do something very different also around domestic violence. I'd like to identify a domestic violence liaison team that responds to every domestic violence call. Why is that important? Because if someone is responding, it says that the family is also in trauma, and the police is there to secure the space. The DV liaison should be in a different color, and they are there for the victim and for the families, because if the victim passes over, the families become the victim, and it is a crime scene, and so now the families can't go into the apartment, can't get papers, and really it becomes trauma. And so I'm looking at the problems that we have and really reimagining how do you build up community and give them voice.
The first time that I saw the body cam footage for when I was pepper sprayed and arrested was at a CCRB proceeding at 1 pp. And I was on the witness stand, and I saw for the first time. It was an incredibly traumatic and emotional experience. I started crying on the witness stand. And the reason that I had not seen the body cam footage prior to that was that it is pattern and practice in these proceedings for the NYPD to withhold this evidence and this discovery, and to bring it at the last minute. So not only do I want to give the CCRB the resources that it needs, like in every other big city where the CCRB, their budget is pegged to the police departments, but I want to ensure that they have the tools to get the evidence so that we can get to a fair outcome. That is good for every single party, and everyone should want that. We know that there are many police officers that put on the uniform and go to do the job and they're doing the right thing. But when they breach that trust, it doesn't just impact the individual. It impacts the entire community, the whole community. We can hold two things together as New Yorkers. I was mugged with my mom in an elevator when I was very young in the building that we grew up in, and her worldview is colored by that experience. When she sees more cops, she feels more safe. But there are other New Yorkers that feel less safe when they see cops. We can hold the two things together, that they are a part of our public safety system, but that they should be held accountable when they step over the line. That is the kind of mayor that I'm going to be.
I was stopped and frisked when I was 19 years old during the Bloomberg administration. And I'm also someone who benefited from a neighbor calling the NYPD when someone who I thought loved me was hurting me. I believe that laws are written to be enforced, and I believe that no one is above the law. Not a mayor, not a president, not anybody. And so, to me, giving the CCRB some teeth, some real resources, is paramount to finding the balance that we seek in true public safety. I also think we need to get police overtime under control. We are spending $1.4 billion in overtime pay when so many of it can actually be moved into shift work. And that is all going to have to be negotiated in the collective bargaining agreement with the Police Benevolent Association. So I think having a mayor that has experience with union contracts is really important. More than that, we need to turn police scanners back on. People forget that right now, our only source of information is the NYPD itself. And so, without any independent review of the so-called criminal activity, I think it's important to turn those scanners back on, make sure our reporters, our journalists are able to access the information so that we can get real coverage of what's happening on our streets.
Just very briefly, when you say give the CCRB more teeth, what's one way to do that?
I think, we should take disciplinary action very seriously, not only as Mr. Blake said, in terms of people who we are hiring from other places, but even here. I mean, I'll give you the Chief of Patrol, John Chell, as an example. That is a man who murdered a person while wearing a uniform, and somehow he has been promoted to be the Chief of Patrol. I don't know, was it two? Either way, we have a culture in the NYPD of promoting the worst in the NYPD. We have to get back to a place where wearing a badge is a privilege.
Thank you.
It's an honor.
Mr. Stringer, how would you hold NYPD officers accountable for misconduct, address racial disparities in policing, and where would you support adopting alternatives to law enforcement?
First of all, let me say, in my entire life, I have never been stopped and frisked. Never. And that's the problem, because the reality is there's two standards of justice here. And that's why I was the first elected official who looked like me, who said it was time to end stop, question, and frisk. But we haven't ended it. It happens every day in our communities. And as mayor, it will be done. Unconstitutional stop and frisk cannot continue in this city. It destroys the fabric of our communities of color, and it makes us all less than good. But I also think we've got to look at discipline and put it truly in an independent body with full funding. And the CCRB should have the final adjudication authority when it comes to police misconduct. You cannot kick it to the NYPD police commissioner. And look at the police commissioner that Eric Adams appointed before Tish. I mean, he's the one that decides? No. So I believe very strongly that we need to reimagine what policing looks like.